Chapter 7. Jews of Krakow. The announcement blared from the speakers. Get up, get out, get moving. 7,000 volunteers are needed for the resettlement camps. The asked-for volunteers had not appeared in Godi Square the next morning, and the Germans were not happy. Just after dawn, they drove through the streets of the ghetto in trucks with big speakers on them, yelling at us to come out. It will be worse for you if you hide, they call. Come out now, and all will be forgiven. I believed them. None of us did. Uncle Moshe, Aunt Gisela, and my cousin Zika were all there with us. They had decided to come and hide in our pigeon coop. So the rest of my aunts and uncles and cousins, there were 12 of us, all crammed inside that little shack on the roof. It was too crowded, but there was no way that we could turn them away. Everyone was afraid of this new announcement, and we had seen too many smaller resettlements to take it lightly. At least all of us, pressed together in the coop, helped keep us warm. We couldn't start a fire, or the smoke would give us away. A gunshot rang out. Crack! A woman screamed. Pop, 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 went a machine gun. I scrambled to the little window of our coop, where we had hung a blanket to hide us. Yanek, no! My mother whispered, but I had to see. Across the street was a building that had been turned into a hospital, and I watched through a hole in the blanket as the Nazis pushed sick people out of the door and down the steps. Some of them were too weak to walk and collapsed on the pavement. They cried out piteously. What's happening? Moshe asked. My heart was in my throat, but I managed to answer. Sick people, old people, they're taking them out of the hospital. They can't be taking them to the work camps or for resettlement, Moshe said. His voice was quiet but urgent. They would never take the sick or the old away to work. They're taking them to die, and anyone else with them. As I watched, the Nazis walked up behind the sick people from the hospital and started to shoot. Bodies fell on bodies, a great pile of them in the street. They fell with terrible screams. I pulled away from the window, unable to watch anymore. No, I said, they're not taking them away. They're shooting them right there. Not even Uncle Moshe had anything to say about that. My mother reached for my hand and pulled me back to her. We sat like that for hours, listening to the gunshots and the screams in the street. My younger cousins huddled next to their mothers, weeping on and off quietly. I was terrified just like they were, but I wasn't going to cry. I was a man now, I reminded myself. I was a man, and I wanted to do something to stop the Nazis, to save my family. I asked myself over and over again what I could do to help, but I had no answer. Shunk, shunk. The big metal door on the roof rattled. Someone was trying to come through. I held my breath listening. Shunk, 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 shunk. Would the steel bars hold? Would whoever on the other side start shooting? I watched my mother's eyes grow wide again, watched her chest heave as she breathed faster and faster. She looked like she might scream, which would give us away for sure. My father hugged her close, holding her face to his shoulder. Shunk, 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 shunk. I waited for a gunshot. Waited. But then, for whatever reason, the rattling stopped, and whoever it was went away. We held still, none of us daring to breathe, waiting for someone to try to come through again. But an hour passed, and then another, and no one came back. That evening, the trucks drove through the streets again with a new message for us. Jews of Krakow, unless everyone comes to Godi Square for selection, this ghetto will be liquidated. If you do not come out of your houses by 6 p.m., every one of you will be shot on sight when we find you. Liquidated. Do you hear that? Uncle Abraham said. Liquidated, like it's a business decision. They would get rid of us like so many old pairs of shoes. We should go, Moshe said, and he stood. You heard them. They will kill us if we don't. They will kill us if we do, I said. They said they will liquidate the ghetto only if we do not come out. By hiding, we seal our death warrant, Moshe said. No, I said. I could feel my pulse racing. We can't trust them. It's a trick. I know it is. It's a trick to get us to come out of our hiding place. You're still a boy, Yanek, even if you've had your bar mitzvah. Listen to me, all of you. If we stay here and are found, we'll be shot, Moshe argued. And he opened the door to the coop. We have to go now. If we do what they say, they may let us live. My uncles, cousins started arguing about it. David agreed with Moshe. Abraham wanted to stay. My aunts argued too, and the younger children started to cry. I looked to my parents to see what they wanted, but my mother's face was still buried in my father's shoulder. He was comforting her. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wasn't a boy. Not anymore. Not after my bar mitzvah. Not after a year in the Krakow ghetto. I knew I had to be a grown up now, for my parents, for everyone. I pushed past Uncle Moshe and I marched to the big metal door. I yanked off the steel bars and I flung the door open with a clang. There, I said, go if you want to leave so badly. If you want to hand yourselves over to those killers, then do it right now. But I'm not. I've seen what those Nazis think of us, how they treat us. We all have. So they kill us if they find us. Here, if we go down there and on our own, they will most certainly kill us. At least if we hide here, there's a chance they won't find us. There's a chance. That's a chance I'm willing to take. My outburst shut everyone else up. They all stared at one another without speaking until my father rose. Yanek speaks with the wisdom of the prophet Isaiah, he said softly, and then quoted, "Come, my people, and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until the wrath is past." He cleared his throat and looked around. Mina and I are staying too. One by one, the others agreed, until even Uncle Moshe sat down and was quiet. I closed the door and I slid the steel bars back in place, making sure that they were tight. Night fell, and with it came more gunshots, more screams from the street below. The deportation lasted for 2 days. On the third day, when the sun rose, there were no more trucks in the street, no more gunshots, and no more Nazis. They did not liquidate the entire ghetto, as they promised. Once their quota was filled, they went away again. 7,000 Jews had been collected and taken away to die, but we were not among them. Chapter 8. After the deportation, the wailing of old women could be heard from nearly every window and door in the ghetto. 7,000 husbands and fathers, wives and mothers, brothers and sisters, and children had been taken to their deaths, or so we heard from survivors. Rumors were whispered in the streets that shootings in the woods were too much trouble for the Nazis. Now they were gassing Jews to death in trucks and boiling their bodies to make soap, or so it was said. The thought of that made my stomach turn. There were more deportations, but for a time there were smaller selections, like those that had come before. And my existence in the ghetto, it wasn't a life, just an existence, went back to what it was. Those who could work were not taken away, and so reluctantly, my father and I showed up for work details every morning. I was assigned to a tailor shop, and the work was manageable, but it seemed as if my former life, school, friends, time to play and read, belonged to another world entirely. One afternoon after work, I made a fateful decision. I went by a friend's house instead of going directly back to my family's rooftop hideaway. If I had gone straight home, if I had gone out to get our rations with my mother and father, things might have turned out very differently than they did. The streets of the ghetto were empty when I finally headed for home that day. The emptiness could only mean one thing: another deportation. When the Nazis came looking for Jews to deport, all the people who lived on the streets found places to hide. They had to, or they'd be taken. Men and women with homes to go to put their heads down and hurried there by whatever back alleys and side streets that they could. I skirted down Lumengowski Street, ready to duck behind a busted up piece of furniture or hide in a pile of rags if I heard the Nazis coming. I was almost home when I heard the bark of German officers around the corner and the shuffling of shoes on pavement. I scanned the area for any place I could hide, but there wasn't one. I squeezed myself into a corner on the other side of a short set of stairs to an apartment building and tried to disappear into the shadows. The Nazi officers marched by in the street in front of me. All they had to do was turn their heads to see me, but they swept their eyes forward, followed by a ragtag group of Jews who were being deported. I watched them go by, a few hundred or so, their heads bent low, and every one of them silent as the grave. Wait, there, in the middle of the crowd. I froze. Was that my mother and father? I stood on my toes, trying to see into the mass of people, but the angle had changed, and I was standing in plain sight now. My head and shoulders were well over the top of the short flight of stairs, but I didn't care. Were my parents in that deportation? Maybe I had just seen a couple who resembled them. I wanted to scream, and I almost ran to the column of marching Jews to call out my parents' name, to find out if that really was them. But the sight of the German SS officers bringing up the rear stopped me. If my parents were being marched out right now, I'd be caught and never see them again. But if it was them, as soon as the prisoners and their guards were passed, I dashed out from behind the stairs and ran all the way home. I burst through the door of our apartment building and raced up the stairs and pounded on the big metal door of our rooftop hideaway. The bars were still over the door, which was good news. That meant someone was still up there. I prayed it was my mother, and I called through the door to her as I pounded away. Behind the door, I heard the steel bars being lifted, and I stopped knocking, my heart racing. The door opened, and my cousin Sala stood behind it, tears running down her face. "No," I said, "no." My knees went weak, and I closed my eyes against the truth that was coming. "Yanek," Sala said. "Yanek, thank God you're all right." "Where are they?" I demanded, even though I already knew. "Sala, where are my parents?" "I'm so sorry, Yanek. The Nazis grabbed them as they were coming back from buying bread. I saw them taken right there in the street in front of the building." I staggered through the door and into the pigeon coop that had become our home, our sanctuary, for more than a year. It was totally empty. I fell to my knees and sobbed. Sala put her hand on my shoulder, but I could barely feel it. Mama, Papa, they were gone. My family was gone. I felt like my heart was being wrenched out of my chest. The emptiness of the pigeon coop weighed heavy on me. I was the only one left. How would I survive? Why should I survive? Maybe I should just go and give myself to the Nazis, I thought with bitterness, with defeat. No, I thought. I wiped my tears from my eyes with the back of my sleeve. My parents would not want that for me. In the place of my pain, I felt the stirring of determination. I would not give up. I would not turn myself in. No matter what the Nazis did to me, no matter what they took from me, I would survive. I was 13 years old and my parents were gone. I was all alone in this world, but I would survive on my own. Plazau concentration camp, 1942 to 1943. Chapter 9. The Nazis snatched me up one day when I was at work. I was still working at the tailor shop in Krakow, hoping that would save me from the deportations, but my work there ended up being the reason I was taken. The tailor shop at Plazau and a nearby labor camp needed more workers, they were told. So we were taken. I had known this day would come. In the days and weeks after my parents were deported, the rest of my family had gone too. Uncle Moshe had disappeared while on a work detail. Uncle Abraham and Aunt Fela were pulled from their home in a deportation. Cousins Sala, Dawid, and their two boys were taken while in line for bread. Aunt Gisela and little Zika went for a voluntary selection in Godi Square, in hopes that the Nazis meant what they said about resettlement. By the summer of 1942, only I remained, the sole member of my family, left in the Krakow ghetto. I thought I would be ready for it when they took me away, but I wasn't. They loaded us into a truck, and all the horror stories I had heard suddenly became real to me. Were the Nazis lying to us? Were we going to die? Were we being taken to the woods to be shot? I panicked, looking for a way out of the truck, out of Plazau, out of this nightmare that had already swallowed my parents and everyone I loved. But just outside the truck were Nazis with machine guns. They didn't even have to point them at me for the message to be clear. It was either go where this truck was taking me or die here on the streets of Krakow. I had sworn to myself I would survive, so I made the choice that kept me alive, if only for the moment, and I took the seat on the truck. The women I worked with had begged to be able to tell their families back in the ghetto goodbye, to tell them where they were being taken, but the Nazis didn't listen. They just poked them with their rifles and threatened to shoot them if they didn't get in the truck. The women sobbed the whole way to Plazau, but I didn't. I was gripped by fear, but I wasn't sad to leave the ghetto. All my family were gone, and I had no more possessions of any value anyway. There was nothing left for me there. The truck did, after all, take us to Plazau. It was a labor camp just a few kilometers outside of Krakow. The truck stopped just outside the camp's gate, where more Jews were being unloaded from trucks. I didn't know where the others had come from. Krakow, maybe? One of the villages outside the city? Somewhere else? Some of them carried suitcases and bags. Others, like us, had nothing. Schnell, schnell, a German soldier barked at me. Quickly, quickly. And he struck me in the back with the butt of his rifle, and I stumbled forward into the dirt. I scraped the skin off my palms trying to catch myself, but that was nothing compared to the screaming pain in my shoulder. I got to my feet and I brushed the grit from my bleeding hands as they were herded inside. Plazau was a series of long, low buildings separated by dirt roads and surrounded by barbed wire. The few other men and I were separated from the women. A guard ordered us to turn over any valuables, and I gave him the few zloty that I had in my pockets. After that, we were ordered to take off our clothes. Reluctantly, I removed my dirty, too short shirt and pants and added them to the pile. Another soldier gave me a pair of wooden shoes and a blue-gray striped prisoner uniform made out of thick canvas material. I put them on and held my arms out to look at myself in my new clothes. Now I am officially a prisoner, I thought. I almost laughed. In truth, I had been a prisoner since the Nazis walled off the Krakow ghetto, but now I finally looked the part. After we were all given uniforms, we were marched to the Plazau tailor shop by another prisoner wearing a yellow armband. He was a capo, he told us, a prisoner who'd been put in charge of other prisoners by the Nazis, so they wouldn't have to deal with us all the time. We were to do what he told us, he said, or we would feel the sting of the wooden club he carried. All of us knew enough by now to follow along and do whatever we were told without speaking. There were thousands of prisoners in Plazau, most wearing a yellow Star of David on their uniforms to show that they were Jews. But there were other prisoners too, I soon learned, all of whom wore different colored triangles. The red armbands belonged to political prisoners. Green meant criminals. Black armbands were worn by gypsies, though there were very few of those, as they were usually killed straight off. Purple meant Jehovah's Witness. Homosexuals wore pink, and all of them had a little letter in their triangle to tell you where they were from. P meant Poland or Pole. T was Chechen or Czech. J meant Yugoslavian or Yugoslavian. There was no letter in the Jewish stars, though. No matter where we had come from, we had no country. We were only Jews. As I scanned the prisoners along the way to the tailor shop, I thought I saw a familiar face, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Uncle Moshe. Uncle Moshe, I called. Uncle Moshe, it's me, Yanek. Moshe looked up, not in excitement, but in horror. His eyes were wide, and he shook his head at me quickly before turning his gaze back to the ground. Who called there? Who was that? Our capo barked, bringing my group to a halt. The prisoners looked back over their shoulders to show that it hadn't been them, and I looked back too, as though trying to see who had called out. One of the men behind me gave me an angry glare, and then turned as if to see if he could find the source of the yell behind him. The prisoners will remain silent unless spoken to, the capo told us, and he struck a man in the back with his club. As the capo herded us the rest of the way to the tailor shop, my face burned with shame. I was such a fool. Someone had been hurt because I had called out to Moshe. I resolved then and there not to speak again until I could find Moshe and talk to him privately. We worked all day in the tailor shop, doing what we had done in Plazau, only now there were more SS guards, and we were often beaten for no other reason than just because we were Jews. I saw one man struck so hard in the head with a club that he fell off his stool and didn't get up again. He was dragged away and never returned. And suddenly I understood why the Plazau tailor shop needed new workers, and always would. That night we were marched to our barracks, where we were each given a small piece of bread and a bowl of watery soup. I was just finishing my meager meal when Uncle Moshe found me. Yanek, he said, and he glanced around to make sure that our barrack capo was gone, and then pulled me into a hug. I hadn't hugged someone in so long that I was almost too stunned to embrace him back. Moshe held me away from him to look me over and then pulled me close again. I'm sorry I couldn't greet you this morning, but no doubt you've seen what they do to anyone who speaks out of turn. I nodded. Yanek, we haven't much time, he whispered. Listen closely. Here at Plazau, you must do nothing to stand out. From now on, you have no name, no personality, no family, no friends. Do you understand? Nothing to identify you, nothing to care about. Not if you want to survive. You must be anonymous to these monsters. Give your name to no one. Keep it secret in here, Uncle Moshe said, tapping his heart with his fist. Are my parents here? I asked him, daring to hope. If Moshe was alive, why not my mother and father? Moshe shook his head. I'm sorry, boy. No. Unless they were taken to another work camp, they are most likely dead. And Plazow is where they bring most of us from Krakow, being so close. My legs felt wobbly. I had to sit down on my bunk, or I would have collapsed. I had known my parents might be dead. There were rumors, after all, about where people went to when they were taken. But I suppose I'd never let myself really and truly believe it until now. I didn't try to stop the tears that filled my eyes and coursed down my cheeks. Moshe sat beside me and put a hand on my knee. But you are alive, boy. There's a blessing in that. You're the only other one of us to survive. I suddenly realized what Moshe was saying. Aunt Gisela? Little Zyka? I asked. His wife and daughter. Moshe's own eyes teared up, and quickly he wiped them with the back of his hands. Dead, he said. They could not work, so the Nazis shot them. I asked about my other uncles and cousins, but Moshe shook his head. You and I are the only ones left. You must show them that you can work, boy, so you can keep living. I have a job in the tailor shop, I said, sniffling. Good, good. Any job you can do outside the camp will help you avoid Amon Goeth. Who? The commandant of the camp. Outside, someone shouted. Roll call, Moshe said, and he stood. We must all go and line up to be counted. Remember, you are no one. You have no name. You do not speak. You do not look at them. You do not volunteer for anything. You work, but not so hard they notice you. Gisela, Zyka, your parents, Oscar and Mina, they are dead and gone now, Yanek. But we could grieve for them if we could. But we have only one purpose now, survive. Survive at all costs, Yanek. We cannot let these monsters tear us from the pages of the world. I nodded, wiping away my own tears, and followed Moshe to the open field in the camp where roll call was taken. We were lined up in row upon row while the Nazis checked the numbers on our uniforms against the tally on their clipboards. I realized then they would beat us and starve us and shoot us like we didn't matter, but they would always keep track of us. While soldiers worked their ways up and down the lines checking us off, one man in a crisp SS officer's uniform and tall riding boots walked among the prisoners, twitching a riding crop against his legs. Two sturdy-looking German shepherd dogs followed along behind him. The SS officer stopped in front of the prisoner beside me and suddenly commanded his dogs, Attack! Attack! Kill the Jew! The two dogs were calm as pets one moment, and the next they became rabid killers. They leaped at the man and took him down in their jaws. The man screamed for mercy and then for help as the dogs bit and tore at him right beside me. I wanted to help, to fight back, but Moshe glanced back at me with a warning in his eyes. And I remembered, I was no one, I had no name, they must not notice me. So I stared straight ahead at the ground, just like everyone else, silent and still as the man beside me was ripped apart. When he stopped moving and stopped crying out, the SS officer shot the man through the head with his pistol. Goeth looked into our faces, daring one of us to react, and then walked away laughing. That was how I was introduced to Commandant Amon Goeth. When roll call ended, Moshe went to his barrack and I went to mine. The man beside me hadn't been the only man to die at roll call. Another was shot, supposedly for not smacking his cap against his leg with enough snap when doffing it for one of the soldiers. I felt as though I had survived a battle. What's that make the score? I heard someone ask. It was one of the men who had already been in the camp before I arrived. Goeth 7, Jews 0, another man said. What's that? I asked. How many Jews Goeth has killed since you've been here? No, the man said. How many Jews Goeth has killed today? Chapter 10. Amon Goeth wouldn't have his breakfast each day until he'd killed at least one Jew. He liked most to sit on the second floor balcony of his house, overlooking the camp, and shoot Jews with a rifle while he listened to music on his record player. It didn't matter who you were or what you had done. If you'd hurried through the parade grounds trying not to get shot, he would shoot you on purpose. You had to walk through normally, acting like there wasn't a madman on the balcony above you with a rifle ready to shoot you, and hope he didn't notice you. The best way to not get shot was to not be there in the first place. I escaped the daily shooting gallery through my job at the tailor shop. I left early in the morning and returned in time for roll call, and then hard bread and thin soup in the barracks each night. Uncle Moshe did the same, working in a furrier's shop outside the camp. There was still a chance Goeth would get me at roll call. I mean, no one was safe, not even the capos. But with Moshe's help, I learned to be anonymous enough to survive for months. The tailor shop closed down. I was never sure why, but one morning, when the tailors and I assembled, we were told our services at the factory were no longer required. We looked around nervously at one another. Without our off-camp job, we would be around Amon Goeth all day, and without special skills, we were even less valuable than before. I was put to work building new barracks for the never-ceasing truckloads and trainloads of Jews brought to Plazow every day. It was back-breaking work, digging out a level patch of earth, hauling rocks in wheelbarrows, hammering boards into place, and always there was the threat of Amon Goeth and his dogs. After a man in my work detail was killed for moving too slowly, Uncle Moshe traded his daily rations to a capo to get me assigned to a new job outside the camp. I reported to my new work detail the next morning and was loaded into a truck, not knowing where we were going or what we were doing. None of us did. This was some new job no one had ever done before, and we were all a little nervous. There was always a chance that our work would be to dig graves in the woods and then be shot to fill them. The truck bounced to a stop, and the Nazis ordered us out. But it wasn't the woods that we had been taken to or another factory. It was the Krakow ghetto. We looked at one another in wonder. Why had we been brought back to the ghetto? A guard at the gate of the Wałska Street led us through, and we saw right away what was different. There were no more people. No one was on the streets, and no one was in the houses. The whole ghetto had been liquidated after I'd left. There was no sign of life anywhere. The entire ghetto must be cleaned, one of the Nazis told us. There must be no taint of Jews left. We were told how to search each flat for anything of value and how to sort what was left into piles on the floor for removal and disposal. Clothes should be sorted in one way, household items in another. We were to take nothing out with us under penalty of death. As I walked the empty streets of Pogorza, my chest felt heavy. I was overwhelmed with memories. I hadn't been gone long, and the last few years I had lived here had been a nightmare. But what I remembered wasn't the snow shoveling and the shootings or the starvation. I remembered walking to the market with my mother, visiting my father at work, playing ball in the street with my friends. This neighborhood had been my home once, and it always would be, even after the taint of Jews had been scrubbed away. As if to tear my heart into even more pieces, I was assigned to clean out the apartment building where I had lived with my parents. While other boys worked the bottom floor, I climbed the stairs, stopped and stood where no one could see me, remembering. Mr. Barkowick on the second floor singing along with the radio. Mrs. Szymanski sweeping the third floor landing. Any minute now, I thought my mother's voice would come calling down the stairs, "Yanek, dinner!" I waited, but there was no radio, no sweeping, no call from my mother. Nothing but the quiet shuffling of the boys working the flats on the first floor. I climbed the stairs to my old floor and crept down the hall. This corridor had once been so familiar to me that I had traveled it without ever really seeing it. But now it was different. Now I could see the worn spots in the hall rugs, the broken piece of molding along the ceiling, the burned out bulb in the light fixture. There was a new smell, too. Something putrid, like nothing I'd ever smelled before. It was the strongest near the door to Mr. Tatarka's flat. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open the rest of the way to look inside. Mr. Tatarka lay in the middle of the front room of his apartment, beside the chair he'd stolen from the Immerglicks, dead in a pool of his own blood. At least I thought it was Mr. Tatarka. The body was black and shriveled, all rags and bones, and I stumbled back into the hall and retched. The smell and the sight of it, it was all just too much. I threw up again, tears streaming down my burning eyes, and I ran. I ran not for my old flat, the one that we had shared with the 3 other families. I ran instead for the roof, where it had been just me and my mother and father, safe and alone in our little pigeon coop. I burst through the big metal door and out onto the rooftop, gulping in big lungfuls of fresh air. The smell eventually went away, but not the memory of it, nor the vision of Mr. Tatarka's decomposing body. I stood with my hands on my knees for a while until my breathing returned to normal. but I knew I'd have to get back soon. It wouldn't do for the Nazis to notice me for any reason. I went into the pigeon coop, fighting back all the memories of my mother and father. I sifted through what was left. Someone else had lived here after I had been taken. There was a tattered scarf I didn't remember, and a red blanket that hadn't been mine. But my father's old coat was still there in the corner. I knew I couldn't take it with me, but I picked it up and I put it on. I more to remember the smell of him than anything. It fit me better than it had ever had, and I realized suddenly that even though I was thin and starving, I had still grown. I was 14 now and almost as tall as my father had been. I was pulling the coat off when I felt a lump in one of the sleeves. I felt it with my fingers. Something was sewn into the sleeve. Of course, Mother had sewn our extra money into our coats, so it couldn't be stolen in the raid. I glanced up outside the coop to make sure no one else had made it to the roof yet, and I hastily ripped the seams of my father's coat apart. There were 1,000 zloty inside, and I dug through the pile of things, found my old coat as well, and ripped out the seams. Another 1,000 zloty. 2,000 zloty. The Nazis didn't sell food in the labor camp, of course, but there were ways to buy food smuggled in from the outside. Uncle Moshe would know how. Using a needle and thread of my mother's that had been left behind, I tore out one of the seams in my prisoner coat and I sewed the money inside. I knew how to sew beautifully now from my work in the tailor shop. I finished it quickly and was pleased with my work. Only the closest examination would find the money inside. I hurried to put the rest of the few things in the pigeon coop into piles in case someone did come up here to clean up, and I went back down to find the boys from my work detail. They'd already made it to the top floor, and I joined in with a group cleaning out my family's old flat, carefully avoiding Mr. Tartarka's apartment. We worked the rest of the day, putting clothes in one pile, household goods in another. I always went for the clothes first, running my hands along the seams to see if anyone else had had the same idea as my mother, and once found a pair of diamond earrings. I hooked them inside my jacket under my arms and hoped that they wouldn't fall out. Uncle Moshe and I were going to eat well tonight. All the way back to the camp, I worried that I would be discovered, but the guards either didn't think we would try to sneak anything back in or figured there wasn't anything left of value in the ghetto to smuggle. For most part, they were right. More than just the people had been taken from the ghetto. 2 years of imprisonment and starvation and raids had bled the ghetto dry of almost anything worth owning. As we assembled for roll call, I whispered for Uncle Moshe to come to my barracks at dinner. I also asked him what the score was. Goeth 19, Jews 0, he whispered back. It was a good day to get you out of the camp. I nodded. A very good day indeed. Okay, that's it for today.